In this video, we'll show you how to change the rear shocks on your Ford Fusion. You can find them on CarParts.com via the link in the description. Before lifting your vehicle, it is necessary to measure the distance between the center of your wheel and the wheel arch. This will allow you to achieve an optimal tightening of the parts in their initial position. For safety reasons, we strongly suggest watching our video on how to jack your Ford Fusion safely. In order to change the rear shocks on your vehicle, it is necessary to remove the rear upper control arm. The components to be removed are very often seized up, so don't hesitate to brush and to use penetrating oil to make removal easier. Now you need to support the brake disc with a jack to make it easier to remove the wheel knuckle upper retaining bolt. Using a ratchet and a 15mm socket, unscrew the upper wheel knuckle retaining bolt. Finish unscrewing by hand. Then remove the bolt. Block the rotation of the shock's lower retaining nut with an 18mm wrench. Using a ratchet and an 18mm socket, unscrew the bolt. Remove the bolt. Then lower the jack slightly. This will release the control arm from the wheel knuckle. Using a 15mm wrench, unscrew the retaining bolt on the chassis. Finish unscrewing by hand. You can now remove the upper control arm. You can now access the upper shock mount. Brush off the bolts of the rear shock mount and spray them with penetrating oil. Using a ratchet, an extender, and a 14mm socket, unscrew the 3 retaining bolts. You can use a ratchet ring wrench. Remove the shock mount assembly. To avoid damaging the bushing, it will be necessary to reinstall the shock mount in the same position as before. To ensure that the part is properly installed during reassembly, start by placing a sheet of paper on the workbench and transfer the shock mount measurements onto it.
For great content, our best price, and fast shipping, download the CarParts.com app now.
Secure the shock in a vise. Block the rotation of the holding nut with an 18mm wrench. Using a ratchet and a 15mm socket, unscrew the upper fastening bolt of the shock. Remove the shock mount. Using a wire brush, brush off the location of the shock absorber and grease it to make it easier to install. Then place it on the sheet. You can order the rear shocks used in the video on CarParts.com via the link in the description. Take your new shock. Before installing the new shocks, it is necessary to prime them by pressing the shock vertically so that the gas and hydraulic fluid are separated. Insert the shock starting from the top part. Next, reinsert the bolt. Once in place, screw the retaining nut back on by hand. You can then screw the bolt back in using a ratchet. Then transfer the same measurements to the shock mount. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. Don't hesitate to double-check the position of the rear shock in the shock mount. Your new rear shock assembly is now ready to be installed. Using a wire brush, brush off the location of the shock absorber and grease it to make it easier to install. Insert the shock starting from the top part. Then screw the retaining bolts back in. Finish the tightening of the bolts with a torque wrench. Brush and grease the control arm area to facilitate its installation. Take the control arm. In our case, we took this opportunity to change it. Then insert it from its upper part. Screw the retaining bolt back in until it makes contact. Insert the shock into its lower slot. Next, use the jack to lift the lower control arm in order to install the upper control arm in the wheel knuckle. Use a plastic mallet to fit it into place. Use a flathead screwdriver to pry and align the control arm bushing with the bolt insertion hole. Depending on the condition of the bolts, you can apply copper grease to extend the bushing's lifespan. Then, screw the bolt back on until they make contact using a ratchet in a 14mm socket. You'll need to pry it out with a big flathead screwdriver or a small crowbar. To avoid damaging the bushings, tighten the upper control bolts in the vehicle on the ground position. Lift the shock base with the jack until the original measurement between the center of the wheel and the wheel arch is reached. Once at a distance, finish tightening the bolts with a torque wrench. Next, add the recommended clamping angle. Lower the jack slightly to bring the shock base closer to its slot. You can then screw the bolt back in using a ratchet. Block the rotation of the holding nut with an 18mm wrench. Finish tightening using a torque wrench. You can now repeat the same process on the other side. Then you will be able to put the wheels back on your vehicle. Put the car back on the ground and block the wheels properly. Operation complete.